Coming up on this week's episode of CEO Yourself.
The press can play a really key role in shaping who you are to the public, and it sort of becomes this entity that's outside of yourself that you can't really control. And I felt that if I stayed in that space, I would lose my ability to just be who I wanted to be.
Caggie Dunlop is a podcast queen and author of Saturn Returns. Today on CEO Yourself, we deep dive her CEO superpower, authenticity. That's actually like the feels for me today is you're like the podcast queen. And the fact that I'm interviewing you is bizarre. How many episodes have you done now?
I actually don't know. I should know.
Would it be 100 or?
Yeah, definitely.
Hundreds.
Hundreds.
Wow.
I have actually no idea.
No idea. You're leaning so far back. This is just like your MO.
Yeah, this is my happy place.
Oh, that's so nice. When did you start filming?
When did we start filming, or when did we start
recording the podcast?
So we started in 2019, which feels so long ago now. And it wasn't a pandemic project, as I think many podcasts were. It was something that I'd conceptualized before, in sort of 2018, as I was going through my Saturn return. And then we started recording, we're trying to get brands involved, and then, lockdown happened.
And it's just been a natural evolution ever since.
I think it lent itself to that moment in time because, you know, the tagline of the show is "You are not alone." That was not intentional, given that everyone...
The universe is serving me.
I know, I was like, that's a happy coincidence. And so because of the nature of the show is very introspective, it's around spirituality. It's a niche subject, Saturn Returns, and then we're covering quite esoteric alternative practices. But because everyone was, going through this collective crisis and a personal one, locked up at home, people would like, okay, I'll listen to a podcast. And that's when we developed our sort of core audience, and it's grown from there.
Amazing. And you just released your first book?
Yeah, which came out a year ago.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it feels like it was, because I think, how our work can be quite quick and it's like on to the next. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to really, it's probably taken me a year to realize that I've actually written a book and to appreciate what that entails.
Was that like a life goal?
No.
Really?
Well, it wasn't. I knew that I had a book in me, but it wasn't something that I was like, I have to write a book. The opportunity actually, I was very fortunate that during the pandemic as well, I think one episode of Saturn Returns had come out and someone messaged me online saying, have you considered writing a book? And it was literally, I'd literally just done one episode of the podcast. I was like, kind of, not really. And then she was like, well, let's have a conversation about it. And she was quite a junior editor at a big publishing company. And then that suddenly started evolving quite quickly. And I just thought, I'm actually really dyslexic. Really? So when they said, do you think you're capable of writing a book? I was like, yeah, of course I am. And then they said, okay, it will be 60,000 words. And my brain just couldn't really compute how many words that was. So I was like, yeah, that's fine. So it was
no fear.
Yeah, well, I didn't really know what the process was going to be like. I had nothing to go off, but I'm really proud of myself for doing it. It was anyone that's written a book will know it's quite an undertaking, like, emotionally, because essentially the book, for those not that haven't heard about it, it's very much my life and my journey, and then we interweave astrology so that the audience gets to have those personal takeaways of how the subjects relate to them and the themes. But it's pretty raw.
How did you go about writing it? Because surely that's an incredibly intimidating...
In the most ridiculous way. Again, I'm quite a chaotic, disorganized person. One of my dear friends, Africa Brooke, is just releasing her book at the moment, and seeing her put up stuff about how organized and like post-it notes and like categorizing everything, I was like, oh my God, this is the opposite of my process. I just started writing, And then I'd like write another bit, and then I'd jump and dance around all these different chapters. It was complete madness. My poor editor was like, what is going on in this girl's brain? I don't know how I managed to piece it all together, but somehow, it's, you know, that's the beauty of having an editor that helps you do that.
Is it the kind of experience where you have strict deadlines you have to meet? Like, you know, in the movies, the writer's always getting called in and the editor's like, where are my pages?
Yeah.
Was it like that, or were you just given, okay, go away and write it and then bring it to us when you're ready?
There were deadlines, but they were pushed back a number of times because I had I think I remember I was left to my own devices far more than I thought I would be. I didn't know. I thought it would be a bit more of a hands-on approach. It was very much like, okay, come back with the first draft sort of thing. And it is quite an overwhelming thing to go and do on your own when you have no experience. But yeah, and then when it came to actually getting to the point of putting it out, there was a lot of resistance and I wanted to tweak things. But I think with all creative projects, when it comes to actually letting things go and putting it out into the world, you can finesse things to the extent where you can kind of kill some of the magic of it. And so, yeah, I had to just let it go. But it was a whole process.
But it must have been particularly daunting to be putting out so much personal intel. Yeah, it's there forever and you can't change it once it's out, you know. So it's not just like you're writing a book, you're really putting it out there to share.
I know. And I think, again, part of the way that I think, and maybe it is being dyslexic, I don't think I really got my head around the fact that that was going to go out to lots of people. I wrote in a very cathartic way for myself. And also similar to the podcast, I always try and remain in the space of the more honest and vulnerable I can be about my experience, the more likely I am to connect with people and to help them on their journey. And so when I get messages about the book and people saying how it's the rawness and it's the vulnerability that they've related to the most, that's when I'm like, okay, I'm glad I did it that way. But it was definitely felt quite exposing initially, yeah.
Is it serendipity that, you know, lockdown happened and, you know, the first person to reach out to you after you released your first episode is a book editor? Is that serendipity? Like, what is that? Because you're so clearly on exactly the right path for you, which is something has always resonated for me about you. It's so in line with who you are. It's like the universe is supporting you on that journey. Does it feel like that? Or is that just an outward perspective? It's really interesting that you say that because I've been thinking about that a lot recently.
And I'm a big believer in, you know, the power of authenticity. If we do the thing that's right for us in a truthful way that aligns with our values and our integrity, then the universe tends to conspire to make it happen. And you have to kind of jump first and the net will appear. But I think we all like the idea that the net will be there before we jump. And sometimes you've just got to do the thing that you really want to do. And at that time, I knew that I really wanted to put this project together because of what I'd experienced the years before. And they were years when I didn't feel like I was supported. I was very much in a sort of a victimhood mentality, in all honesty. I felt very lost for a big chunk of my 20s. Like I wasn't sure what I was supposed to be doing. And yeah, I found my 20s quite a difficult decade. But I don't think anyone talks about it that much. I mean, they were fun and they were reckless and I wouldn't change a thing. But it's that latter part when you suddenly are aware of I don't know, we always talk about turning 30 like everything's got to file itself into some kind of formal meaning and we have to have our lives figured out. And then I really felt like I didn't. But, you know, the podcast, the concept, it's very aligned with who I am and what I'm about. But that's an ever-evolving thing. And I think we have to recognize where it's time to change course a little bit or redirect. And the way I was thinking about it actually on my way here, because I think at the moment there's a lot of conversation around purpose and, you know, this thing that we're supposed to be doing that's uniquely our North Star. And if we don't find it, we're not fulfilling our life's destiny. And that's quite a tall order and a lot of pressure. But I think it's more about aligning with an essence. And you can apply that to a lot of different things. But I've felt recently, very, very recently, that there's an energy around me that is familiar of a time where things just felt like they were flowing. But that hasn't felt that way, you know, since I started the show. There have been periods, there have been dips, you know, these things ebb and flow. But I think that that's what I'm trying to say to people listening is don't get so fixed that it has to be this one particular thing, and that if you didn't get that job or, you know, the career you thought you wanted didn't work out, that doesn't mean that you've lost at life. It's just about finding and aligning with the thing that gives you that energy that makes you feel like you are on the right track. And then the sort of moments start falling into place, the serendipity, as you say.
Exactly that. Like, I look back at my career and just showing up and doing my best. And as you say, course correcting along the way. Maybe I didn't end up exactly where I envisaged, but in some ways I've ended up in places that were better than I could have envisaged.
Exactly.
Maybe not exactly in the same industry, or I don't know, it's not exactly this perfect plan, but it does always kind of shape and shift and take you exactly where you're meant to be.
Yeah, but you just have to do the thing first. You have to put yourself out there and
take risks, really. Like the course correcting is about taking risks and jumping into the abyss and
not being afraid to fail, because that's an inevitable part of it. And, you know, you will inevitably go off track for periods, but it's just about not remaining stagnant and still, and to continue going. And I say that as someone that can get stuck quite easily. And I'm not naturally that good at pushing forward, to be honest.
I think it's really nice for people to hear as well, even for me to hear from you, because you're someone who looks so completely like you're on the perfect path and in flow. It's nice, it's reassuring to hear that even for you there are moments where you go, whoa, you know, like the up and down. We're all on that same journey. You know, you can be in your perfect dream job and still have days or weeks or months even where you're not vibing it. And then you get back into flow, and it does transform over time, doesn't it?
Exactly. And I think you wouldn't know one without the other. And that's kind of the beauty of it.
So you've already used the word authenticity, which is obviously your CEO superpower. And it's so fitting for you because, I don't know if you remember this, but we first met at Pelicano in Double Bay in Sydney.
Those were the days.
And luckily it was during the day. It wasn't kind of a late night thing. But at the time you were on a certain TV show, and I remember being like totally starstruck. Not even because I watched the show, but because you have this extraordinary star power. I don't know if you know that, but some have it and some don't, and you have it. But I remember immediately being introduced. We have mutual friends, and you were just so down to earth and so authentically you, so approachable despite having this extraordinary star power. So when we spoke about you coming on the podcast and obviously authenticity being your superpower, I thought that was so beautifully fitting, because that would have been the word that came to mind for you in describing you to friends. Over the years since I've watched your career evolve and gotten to know you as a friend, I feel that you managed, despite whatever is going on in your life or whatever room we're in, to just truly stand in your power. How can we do that? How can the listener at home adopt a little bit of that Caggieism?
Oh, that's firstly such a lovely thing to hear. And I wouldn't describe myself in those ways, and that's why it's so nice. We so rarely actually give each other, not you and me, but just people in general, tell each other how we perceive each other. But it's really important. But just to add a bit of context, I moved to, was that when I moved there? Was that when I was?
I don't know how long you been there.
I think I might have been visiting. But when I was doing the TV show, I went to Australia, fell in love with it. I'd already been there a couple of times, and I'm obsessed with it, as you know. And then I decided to actually leave the show and move to Australia, which was...
I didn't know that.
Which was totally crazy. But to kind of go back to your question and to talk about what was going on at the time then, I feel like that particular chapter was very much a manifestation of what I thought I needed to be in life. And when I was younger, I was far more introspective and did poetry and actually was far more aligned with like what I'm about now. But reality TV, it was a bizarre thing because it kind of catapulted us into this world that I just was not prepared for. And I felt that there was the press can play a really key role in shaping who you are to the public. And it sort of becomes this entity that's outside of yourself that you can't really control. And I felt that if I stayed in that space, I would lose my ability to just be who I wanted to be. Does that make sense?
Do you know I did a reality show?
Yeah, you mentioned, but I didn't know what.
We definitely won't go into it.
I'm like, please no one dig up either of these shows, trying to leave it in the past.
Deeply in the past. There's a weird similarity because I did exactly the same thing. I got on the first flight and I came to London.
Really? How
as soon as we wrapped, I literally practically drove to the airport. And,
did you not enjoy it?
I felt the same. I felt like if I pursued that avenue, it was going to take me somewhere that I didn't want to go. And it just felt quite vacuous. And I felt like it was safer for me to distance myself from what that could mean.
I mean, everything you just said is exactly how I felt. But I still sort of grapple with it sometimes because I think the general public view fame and success in this way that's like, oh, well, if you get those things, then you have everything. And that's what everybody wants. But fame in that sort of capacity is I think can be quite a dangerous thing. And I think we can see that more and more as reality TV has emerged as this huge industry with a lot of consequences for people that go on it because people aren't mentally prepared for what happens on those kind of shows. So for me, it definitely felt that in order to be who I'm meant to be, it was necessary to leave. I didn't really anticipate what, the path afterwards, which was a very weird and winding, strange journey of often through the wilderness of living in different places, feeling very lost at times. But I did land on something that I feel it's a slower burner doing something like building a company that's your own and doing a podcast. But the community that I have cultivated as part of doing it has meant so much to me in a way that I think before, when I was famous in that quite overnight way, I always felt very at odds about it. Even if people came up to me and they were like, I loved your Made in Chelsea, I'd be like, oh God, I don't know if I loved me on that show because I didn't like what it represented.
It's also a time in your life that this is me speaking for me, I don't think should be recorded. You know
exactly. Because also it's amazing how still to this day people will reference that, and that's something I'm just going to have to endure, and it's fine. Look, I'm going to say as a caveat, it's given me many opportunities.
And it was an extraordinary experience, right?
It was.
To know how reality TV actually works behind the scenes and to have that crazy experience at such a young age. Many more people watched your show than they did ours. So.
But that's the thing. We were when I was debating doing it, I thought, I sort of remember sitting down with my parents and they didn't have a clue what it was going to be about, what was going to happen. And we sort of thought, well, it will either be successful and it might open some doors. And at the time, I really wanted to start pursuing music. So I thought it might give me this kind of booster, which it kind of did and didn't. But then I thought, well, or it just no one will see it and it will disappear. And I didn't really anticipate the sort of middle lane where it was like we were sort of celebrated and hated just as much. And it opened many doors and it closed quite a few too. So it was a double-edged sword. But to go back to what you said, our early 20s, mine will forever be immortalized in the sort of archives of the Daily Mail and the reality show, which I don't know how I feel about, but it was an amazing experience. But we're all very different people at 21 to who we are in our early 30s. And as a society, especially in the UK, I think we can try and keep people in boxes a lot. The US are a bit more open-minded. I mean, you only have to look at who's been president to be like, I mean, you can do whatever you want. But in the UK, it feels like people like to keep you in the sort of area that they think you belong and you can't venture out of.
I think striving to be authentically yourself as well, particularly in your 20s, means having to make difficult decisions and close doors and move in different directions. Because for me, you can end up in relationships or circumstances like that or jobs, and they're not right for you. They're not authentic to you, which was why we were both flying across the world, passing each other in the sky.
Yeah. The way I always think about that and my desire to keep moving, and I'm so glad that I did, and I would not change that for the world. And I think I always encourage people in their 20s to travel. Even if it doesn't work out, you'll have an amazing experience. But what I will say is your shadow travels with you. And I think I used to think that I could outrun it. And there was definitely stuff that, I had to unpack in my 20s that wasn't that healthy in behaviors. But I think that's just part and parcel of what it means to be in your 20s.
Yeah, and I think it's nice. I wish I'd heard this in my 20s. I wish I had heard women who were through it saying to me, it's okay not to know where you're going and what you want. I went through some crazy experiences in my 20s. And I remember being so hard on myself throughout them, even though I was always trying my best, just being so hard on myself that, as you said, I should have it all figured out. And those friends at school who knew at the age of 12 that they wanted to be a doctor?
Yeah.
They knew they had to study science, really hard for science, and they had to do biology, and then they had to do this. And to this day, I've got this amazing friend, Taylor, and she's a doctor in Sydney, and that's what she always wanted to do. And I was always so envious that she was just so clear on her path. Mine was not like that.
Because you didn't know.
No, but it is true that the universe does support you when you. It just gives you little prompts that you're moving in the right direction, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think my issue was always, I felt supported, but then my capacity to self-sabotage was quite extraordinary.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't think of you like that at all.
Maybe not now, because I've done a lot of work on it. But back then, I felt like I was always pushing the boundaries. I wanted to know where the edges of everything were. And even if opportunities came my way, it was like I just moved through the world very recklessly. And again, I think that that's important to do so you can rub up against the edges of who you are. And that, when we talk about authenticity for someone listening that might be in their early 20s, it might feel, again, like a pressurizing thing of, but who am I? Because we usually spend the sort of former years trying to fit in, right? I don't think our society really cultivates an authentic person. It's more you go to a certain school, you hang out with certain people, you kind of put in these boxes, and then you tend to abandon aspects of yourself that are authentic because they're different and because they make you stand out. And when you're young, you don't want to stand out. You want to fit in. You want to be part of the tribe and part of the cool kids. And I definitely did that. And then sort of would morph into whoever I needed to be. And it's lovely that you said I had a star power, but I very much, and it's interesting because I very much felt like I was acting a lot of the time. I was actually quite shy and introspective, but I presented myself very, very differently because I knew how to, because I'd observed it from other people. And then when I got a little bit tired of that charade, I was like, okay, well, I really want to just be me, because the morphing and the shape-shifting for everyone I met became a little bit exhausting. And that also was kind of tied into this self-sabotaging behavior. But after, a decade of pretend, I was like, I actually don't know who I am. And then I think we kind of spend the next chapter figuring that out.
I hope you're loving this week's episode. To find more inspirational resources and to shop our new product range, visit ceoyourself.com. For the listener, we are all playing roles.
Mm-hmm.
At the moment, I have my career and I'm a mother and I try to be a friend. I occasionally try to be a wife. We're all playing roles. How do you know when you're in your authentic self? How can you feel it?
Because I feel it.
Yeah.
Because I feel, it's like what I was saying before, it's an energy that even today, and it's shifted literally today or in the last couple of days, where I'm like, okay, I'm back in the flow of something. I don't really know how else to describe it. It sounds very woo-woo, but I've had to make a lot of changes recently for that to happen. And even if you are doing something that you love and you get your dream job or you start building a company, it's going to come with layers of responsibility and change and pressure and outside opinion. And I even found myself, my motivation behind wanting to build certain aspects of the brand might not have been coming from the right place. And everything started to feel a bit like sludgy, because I was doing it I was thinking in a way that wasn't authentically me. And even in the sort of the essence of what we're talking about and the title of this podcast, like being a CEO comes with a lot of weighted responsibility of like, oh my God, I'm a CEO. Well, I have to be responsible and serious and bossy, or, all these things that we associate with even that word that can feel very at odds with our true nature. So at the moment, I'm trying to get back in that flow and do the things that I really want to do. And they don't have to make sense to anybody else. And a lot of it for me is about sharing creative projects. Again, it's kind of, my mind is this sort of spider diagram, scattergunny thing of all these different visions and projects that I have, that for a more linear thinker, they just think, doesn't make any sense. But it makes sense to me. And I know that if I follow that, I'll hopefully continue to be in this flow and things will gravitate towards me that help me make it a reality.
Because in the context of a commercial entity, at times it is hard to be authentic because you've also got to pay the bills. You've got to pay your team. You have overheads. It's a business. How do you maintain authenticity with your brand partnerships and so on? And on that point, like, for those listening out there, it's one thing to want to be totally authentically aligned with your job, but at the end of the day, we all have to pay bills. How do we maintain that authenticity from a commercial perspective?
I think it can be quite hard because I think even, the goal at one point is to start the business and then it's to make it a success. And that road to success, it's like, well, firstly, define what success means to you. Because I think for a lot of people in the world that we live in, we, I guess, not that I aspire to be this, but, in the world of tech, of founders, entrepreneurship, it's like become a unicorn company. But that's a huge journey to kind of put yourself on. And if it depends on what your definition of success is. For some people, it might be, having an amazing brand that allows you to live a lifestyle that gives you freedom and flexibility, and you can be a mother within that, and you have a couple of people that work freelance or full-time, whatever it might be. I think it's just about tuning into actually what's going to align with you and what your capacity is as a human being, rather than trying to force yourself into a shape that doesn't fit you. And so for me, I'm trying to not get caught up in that rat race, But also I would say I went to an event recently, and it was with a lot of entrepreneurs and female founders, and hearing some of them speak, you know, that were incredibly successful, that work at companies that have built massive, massive brands. They all said that the most important thing is the story of the founder, and that the vision kind of comes from that, and the strategy and all of the stuff that I think we can get bogged down with actually comes from the person that's driving it being authentically aligned with why they're doing it. And so I guess if that can be your North Star, remembering your why constantly, that will hopefully get you where you're supposed to be.
You can really feel when a brand is true to that founder's purpose or calling.
And what your reason is for doing the thing. It's something that people pick up on.
I think the ego often gets kind of intertwined into our decisions, and it's so hard to... It's something like becoming a mother for me has been the most confronting ego journey of my life. Because
really?
Looking at Xanthi, it just, everything else just falls away when I'm with her. And then you have to assess the time that you spend away from her. And is it worth it? And is it worthy, I should say? And am I doing it for me, for my truth, or am I doing it for my ego?
Mm-hmm.
How do we
differentiate?
Yeah. How do we pull them apart? How do you pull them apart?
Again, quite interestingly, I was thinking about this today, and I was using the term narcissism for myself because I think
kind to yourself, Caggie.
because I think we can all be narcissistic. I think that term gets thrown around usually when someone's describing their ex-boyfriend. They're not there to defend themselves, and they're like, he was a narcissist. It's like, okay, was he? I don't know. But we all possess narcissistic qualities, and
that's confronting to hear. It's true.
It's true.
But it will be confronting for people to hear that.
Yeah, but also the way I looked at it, rather than being like, oh my God, I am a narcissist, I was like, interesting. I probably do possess some narcissistic qualities. I think we all do in the realms and age that we're living in. Yeah, it's so narcissistic. It's impossible not to. It's so unnatural for us to be looking at ourselves all the time and
having to put ourselves forward to build a brand, which again is so not in line with, I think, who we are.
Yeah.
In the day-to-day world.
Exactly.
Like knowing you as a friend. Obviously, you're so truly you on social media, which is what I love about you. But it is also like so not in line with who you are, because I can imagine you dislike it as much as I do.
I'm really not good at it.
I also can see you being like, oh, I have to film this thing, you know?
Yeah, I put it off. I'm terrible. Yeah. And that's something I actually want to do this year is to put myself a bit more forward. But I would say in a way, back to the narcissism thing or the ego, rather than seeing it as a vice or a character flaw, actually being like, I wonder what that part of me needs. What is it seeking? And seeing a distinction between yourself and that part of you. And you could call it ego or whatever. Not that I'm using those interchangeably, but for however it relates to the listener. And because then you realize what's driving you and why it's driving you. And so if you are putting stuff online or wanting to build something because of a narcissistic trait rather than an authentic one that's just because you really love it and is what you want to do, I think that might be quite helpful for people, because I think a lot of people are driven by the former.
I was talking about that with my team the other day of I've gone back to just posting what I like and not caring about the engagement. And on some posts, the engagement's horrendous, and just feeling free and totally disconnected to that is so empowering.
I don't feel free on social media.
Really?
No, I've not.
I guess it is. Again, it's you're playing a role, aren't you? We all are.
Yeah, I just haven't, for whatever reason, I don't feel I've fully allowed. I don't think it's a medium that I particularly like. Some people really are able to communicate who they are on it. that they need, that's a format that works for them. Doesn't for me. I like podcasts. I like long form. I actually, I know I've just said horrible things about it, but I actually really enjoyed aspects of reality TV because I was able to just be me on camera. It was great. I just didn't like the sort of manipulation and everything else that went with it.
Yeah, I was totally myself too, but I should have made more of an effort with my outfits.
Oh my God, so
hair and makeup.
Like, but also I was like, God,
relax.
I was like, have I even been to bed the night before that I was filming? Probably not. Yeah,
there's the narcissist in me. Yeah, no, I agree. Let's touch on Saturn Returns because for my following that maybe don't know anything about Saturn Returns, I asked my team as well. The question that I think springs to mind a lot is, how do you know you're actually in Saturn Returns? Because for me, mine feels like it went from like 21 to 32, which is obviously not Saturn Returns. But how do you know that you're like, is there an exact timing? Because it's quite spread, isn't it?
So it will be between 27 and 30-ish, but you can find your exact time, but you need your date of birth, time of birth, place of birth. But if you go online, there's various platforms where you can actually plug all that information in, and it will tell you the date that your Saturn return falls on and when it will be over. But you tend to feel...
People must be marking that in their diary.
Yeah, no, honestly, people come to my live shows and they're like, so I've put the date in my diary, but I want to know what's going to happen. And I never meant to make people feel afraid of this period of life. I actually think it's an amazing one. It's just...
It does have a negative connotation attached.
It has a massively because it's a sort of like death and rebirth. I mean, Saturn is associated with the Grim Reaper. It's like this ego death when we perhaps have been pursuing things for the wrong reasons. We're out of alignment, but we're so in our head about it that we keep pushing. And then Saturn has this sort of way of throwing in a wrecking ball and everything can come crumbling down. But it does so that we can build things on a healthier, steadier foundation. But it does feel a bit like you're starting again at 30. But if you think about it, a lot of people, you'll notice a lot of people suddenly changing careers in a very dramatic way. And they're starting something totally different from what they've been doing. But it's an idea that's been inside them or a desire for a really long time. Or relationships will fall apart because they're not really based on authenticity or truly aligned. And yeah, it was a particularly, I found mine quite horrendous, but it was also the gateway to so many incredible things. And it clearly resonates with a lot of people, particularly women that are navigating their late 20s to early 30s, because regardless of the sort of astrology lens, it's a challenging time that's not really given that much thought, I think.
And I hope younger women listening out there know, particularly from my perspective, that all of the kind of confusion and mistakes and the wrong paths all suddenly make sense.
Yeah.
It feels like it all kind of culminates into this magical moment that kind of explodes. And then for me, it all then just suddenly fell into place.
Yeah, I sort of feel like it's like going through a whirlpool and nothing makes sense and you're being turned upside down, then it just like spits you out and you're just suddenly standing, you're like, oh, okay. And I get why that had to happen.
Yeah. For me, it was almost like from my early 20s to the end of my 20s, it went from bad to worse to the point where I was like, this is actually comical now. Like even like particularly with dating and things, it was like...
Yeah, that's what was it.
Wow. And then suddenly it was like, whoa, like the positive change was just indescribable.
Yeah, so in terms of the 21 thing, what a lot of people
happening there.
So a lot of people don't know this, but whilst your Saturn return is sort of the big cosmic coming of age, so to speak, you have Saturn squares and opposition. So as a planet, it takes about 29 years to orbit back to the same place in the sky it was when you were born. And that's why it's called a Saturn return, because it has essentially returned, and it's returned with an assessment from the universe about how authentically you've been living. And if you have been living out of alignment, it's going to like snap you back into place in quite a brutal, ruthless way often. But for some people, if they have been, on track and doing what is right for them, it can just mean a up-leveling. Perhaps they get married or they have kids or they get a promotion. So some people don't really even feel it I very much did. It sounds like you did. But the 21 piece is because Saturn, as it kind of does its transit, will have Saturn squares and opposition. So every 7 years is a chapter, because Saturn works in a similar way that we have seasons. Saturn has seasons, but they last 7 years. So at 7, 14, 21, to your Saturn returns, so on and so forth until you die. You have these, moments every 7 years where these themes will come up again, which can feel quite brutal, and they're often to do with boundaries, responsibility, time, discipline, all the good stuff, and about authority. So when we're 21, we think we're the authority of our own lives. We kind of we're taking off the stabilizers, but we don't really know how to do it. And hopefully by the time we get to our Saturn return and come out the other side of that, we've learned enough of the life lessons to be able to stand on our own 2 feet. But that's why those ages can be quite pivotal.
Makes sense why 35 was a bit tricky for me too.
Yeah. So you're going into, I'm about to go into my Saturn maturation and I'm feeling it. But that's why I'm like, if anybody knows about this stuff, but that's why I've had to make some of the decisions, because I can feel, it's one thing intellectualizing it, but then you have to embody it. And embodying it means actually going, okay, I'm gonna listen to the pebbles fall rather than waiting for the boulders to set in.
How do you encourage listeners to jump into the fear and do it anyway? What's your process?
I'm actually really bad at it.
Me too.
I'm really bad at it. I wish I could, give advice. It's like, oh, you just do this, but I would be lying, because I am probably my biggest weakness is procrastination. I can really agonize over a decision, and often to my own detriment. But my process is I wait on something until the pain of staying the same outweighs the anxiety of the unknown. And then I jump. I wouldn't recommend it, but that seems to be my formula.
I'm like, about it until I'm blue in the face. Yeah. Like my husband the other day was like, I actually can't hear about it anymore. You know exactly what to do. That's also comforting for me to hear. I'm not alone.
Or I do think, and I need to practice this myself, I very rarely do it, but sometimes I do. It's like the first thing that comes to you, that first instinct, and to act on it
straight away.
But I don't.
For the agony.
I don't. I wait like a year, and then I'm like, oh, that first download was correct. I should have listened a year ago. I would have saved myself a lot of time.
I do the same. I either act immediately, and it's just I'm really confident knowing this, or it's this long, painful, drawn out stretch.
Yeah, because acting on that first thing seems like you're being erratic, but you're not. You're just going on your intuition. And I think the more that you can do that, the stronger it will get. But again, we don't really live in a society that cultivates or encourages that.
So I have a beautiful quote on authenticity. Authenticity means erasing the gap between what you firmly believe inside and what you reveal to the outside world, which I actually think beautifully reflects a lot of what you've said today, because we have touched on ego and our narcissistic self, and it is about mirroring our truth.
What to the outside world.
But it's not easy in this day and age.
It's not. But I think that's why it's important, whether it's to a friend or a stranger, to say to each other the things that you said to me, because it's really impactful. Like that will really impact me. Like it has. I'm like, oh my God, that's such a lovely thing. I had no idea that she saw me that way. And we do, to go back to the sort of narcissism piece, the world that we live in is very individualistic. And so we're all moving through the world of like, okay, what can I achieve? Like, I want to be my best self and all this stuff, and that's fine. But we are creatures that need a community, that need a tribe. And before we had mirrors, all we had was our perception of ourselves through how we were seen through others. That is how we knew ourselves. And that's still really important. And I think that that's being overlooked, or it's been put into social media. And that's not an accurate or a healthy way to measure who you are, because it's a bunch of strangers online who don't know you. And it can be really damaging, and it's not a reason to make any decisions about yourself or your life.
So let's summarize for the listener. Authenticity. How can they be the most authentic version of themselves wherever they're at in their life? Like, CEO yourself is not about becoming a CEO. It's about feeling like the CEO of your own life. What's your top tips of how our listener can be more authentic?
Well, to kind of echo from what I just mentioned, I think drowning out the noise and kind of tuning that out, dulling it down, and surrounding yourself with people that you respect and that you value, and paying attention to like how they feel about you, asking them what they think about you, like who are you to them, which can be quite a daunting thing. But I think actually, if you're struggling with kind of finding your authenticity, that could be quite useful. And also to tune into that inner voice and try and get in alignment with that essence. And if you don't know what I mean by that, perhaps journal on times in your life where something happened and you just felt ecstatic. You felt so you felt so magnetic. You were like, oh my God, this is it. I never want this day or this moment to end. And think about what was going on. And it's not that you need to go back and repeat that thing, but just by tuning into that, I think you're putting your dial onto something that will then create more of that into your life, and you'll be able to notice it a little bit better. I hope that makes sense. And then the third one, I don't think people really stop and get clear on what their values are. And just, it's a really simple practice, but what we see, online or in the media, and we define success through that, it might not be what's right for us. We might not want that house or that car or whatever those things are. And a great way to kind of tune into what's authentically right for you is just getting super clear on your values. Like, your values are going to be different from mine, and therefore the driving force behind why we do what we do is going to be different. But if you don't know what those things are, you're not going to know what direction to steer yourself in. So I think getting really clear on those things, and then whatever comes into your life, asking yourself whether it aligns with those values or not, and then kind of moving from there.
That's so beautifully put. On the values, it's really interesting. My therapist just encouraged me and Ants to do that, my husband, for those listening, and to do it as individuals for our marriage, but also the values we wanted to have as parents. And then we aligned them together. So we had to shortlist and combine and kind of prioritize which values were most important. It was such an incredible exercise.
Because I'm sure in parenting, right, you fall in love with someone, you know them, they know you, then you have a kid and you're something like, I don't know this version of you. Who the hell are you? And they're like, I don't know this version of you either, because you have different values in that context as well. So I'm sure it's really useful to actually sit down and be like, oh, okay.
A beautiful practice to do with your partner or your husband or, as parents, I think.
Yeah, because then you can respect each other's independent journeys as well as your one together.
Yeah. The only other point I think I would add is just disconnecting from the ego, trying to tough.
But even just by acknowledging,
separate the two, your authentic self and your ego self.
Yeah. And I think if people are like, well, how do I do that? Asking that part of you what it needs. I don't know. There's just something in that creates a separation that I think allows you to be like, okay, that's actually not me.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a beautiful place to end because I could talk all day.
So could I.
Always
Sometimes
do.
like, I have no idea what I'm talking about. I'm just talking. Hope
When we
someone
go for dinner,
found
I'm like,
something.
we're going to need entree, main, and dessert and then we'll still be sitting there at the end, solving the world's problems. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Where can the listener find you other than ordering your book? Listening to your podcast?
Yes. So Saturn Returns, I'm such a useless self-promoter, but Saturn Returns, Your Cosmic Coming of Age is available. Amazon, any good retailer. I don't know what that even means, good retailer. And then Saturn Returns is available on all platforms, the podcast. And they can find me at Caggie's World.
Fantastic. Thank you, Caggie. Such an honour to have you.
Thank you.
It would mean the world to me if you would share today's episode with someone you feel would enjoy it. And don't forget to hit subscribe, like, and leave a comment.